Hi, my name's Jeff Rhodes, and welcome to another video on Office 365. And here you can see the book today. And this example is not in the book, but you'll see I actually copied some of the code straight from the book into implementing this. So you can take a look at it. It's available on Amazon. Let's check it out today on Memorial Day. And the Kindle version is doing pretty well, number 16. So appreciate that from everybody. So let's get started. So what we're going to do today is, let me just show you the app first. Normally I like to build these on the fly, and I started on that, and about 45 minutes in I was realizing it was going to be a very long video. So I'm just going to show you the highlights. So the concept here is to try to build an employee recognition form. And so let's run it. And it turns out, since I'm the only authorized user in my environment, even though I have some guest users, it only works with like full users. So I pick myself here. You can see I'm updating my site. I can say outstanding job on Office 365 deployment. And that's an optional one, is the kind of the concept. Maybe I'll make it bold just to show some HTML rich text. And then the idea is that you get to pick which of the values of the organization the individual did. So I picked some Air Force Academy values in this case. And so I can say, okay, we'll just say service before self. And then this is kind of some of the fun stuff, is do you want to tell the recipient who nominated them? So it turns out that I thought that was going to work really well. It turns out to not really work well on the chat and the post, but it does work on the email. So that one's kind of a work in progress, but I'll check it for now. Send via Teams chat, post to a channel, and send via email, and then there's a link to the channel. So let's submit that so we can see what it looks like. And we see the little dots coming across. Okay, the recognition submitted. And what happened is, you can probably, I'll pull this over, it's in my far right, it said I got a flow there. There you go. So I got this congratulations, outstanding job there. So it came a chat to me, and I got going back to the team. I said, okay, I got some recognition, outstanding job on Office 365 deployment, and then it says you've been recognized by Jeffrey Rhodes, so because I checked that box. And so this part all worked fine, but let's try it again. Let's go in and uncheck that box. So I've got these in slightly a weird order here, so we'll just do it again, and I'll do a slightly one and just say this one doesn't tell recipient. Oh, and by the way, I didn't show my email there, so that was what the email. Notice it came from me to me and had the stuff. So that was the last email. Okay, so let's do this one. We won't check that. We'll still do the emails, and we'll send it again. Again, submitted. I got another flow, but let's go look at the chat first. Oh, and it's kind of funny. I left something in there. We'll find that in the Power BI. I was trying to hide what we'll show next. So that's why we have that style. It doesn't really need it. So the chat came fine. That it doesn't say. Well, actually, I forget actually if this Jeffrey Rhodes is actually saying who it's from or not, but in the post, at least, if I go over to the post, when it comes through, it puts this thing, Jeffrey Rhodes used Power Automate to send this notification. So that kind of kills it. And there's some stuff online about how to get rid of that. And that's what I was trying, that span style, and it didn't actually work. So that's kind of a drag. Let's look at the email. Now this one's nice. Notice that the email now says that it came from PowerApps and Power Automate. And Now notice it doesn't go in the safe senders list, so it could come as spam, but it doesn't say who it's from. And it gives them a form for unsubscribing, which is nice from an anti-spam thing, but it doesn't actually say who sent that. So on the email we're doing okay, but the post to the channel, that one doesn't do it. So we'd have to like do a setup disabling that. But anyway, let's get into the guts of that. Doing it actually while I'm still in Teams, let me show you the visualization. We're going to cover that as well. So we come in and save that data to a SharePoint list so that we can track it, which of our values that people are doing. We can track what's happened the previous 7 days. We'll update that a little bit. So there's some interesting things going on there. And the other idea on that, and if we don't tell who it is, if we had some sort of stalking behavior or something like that, where somebody kept notifying somebody, we'd have a record of who did what, so we could say, hey, put a stop to it or whatever. So we'd want to make it clear that it's not actually anonymous. We're just not telling the user, but we're storing it. We'd make that clear. So, all right, let's jump over to SharePoint. So we'll go back to the browser. So I like to put stuff in SharePoint. You can see we've put those there. Notice these is outstanding. These are the bottom two that I just did. And what I did, the Office, it turns out I don't have it. It would be important to do the Office. And my real example, we did it. In this case, the Active Directory is not all set up, so we didn't have any data. And then I just did a true-false column for each of our values, and as well as the different choices that we selected. So that's fairly straightforward. So let's go over to PowerApps. So there's some somewhat interesting things going on here. So the first one is our data sources. So we're going to collect Office 365 users. That's going to be to look up all our users. We're going to point to our recognition SharePoint one, and then this is our PowerApps. I can actually look at that one. Okay, well, you can kind of tell that's our PowerApps deal there. And by the way, when we get to that, it's sometimes a little hard to find that PowerApps. Whoops, even now I'm in trouble finding it. Yeah, so, I said PowerApps, I meant Power Automate. That's our Power Automate, and that's how you get to it there. So we'll get to that in a second. So let's go back and look at all our things. So the first one is we've got a gallery, which I've got hidden. Okay, and so we're going to use that Office 365 search the users, and then this is our search box. We're going to use it to look for whatever they put in and grab the top 50, the dot. And notice if we come in here, if we come in, let's back that up a little bit. Whoops. So that's a record, and then we do dot value, and that is a table. So that's what we want to link to. And then the other thing that's interesting there is, well, it looks a little odd because it puts all the people, whoever's at the front of the alphabet. So I like to set the visible. So I've got it is blank. I've got a variable var recipient. If that's blank, if it's not blank, then we want it to visible be true, or if they've typed something in the search box. Okay, so how do we set the on visible? Well, it's got set the var recipient. Well, it's got an on select. So we just say, okay, on select that method or that event, we set that var recipient to whatever the selected thing of the user is. So let's go look at that real quick. So notice the minute I start typing in, I've got my brother in there, okay. As I start typing it in, it selects it. So one other thing, you've probably seen this in other videos, I kind of find it's a little hard to tell which one's actually selected or which one's a choice. So notice when I do select it, I update that text, which I'll show you in a second. But I also like to come in here and select that field, and I'll set the color or the fill. And so if it's selected, then it's yellow, otherwise it's white. And so that's kind of nice. You can tell very visually which one it is. So while we're at it, let's go in and look at the text of that banner at the beginning. So I use a similar. If it's blank, then I just say employee recognition. If it's not blank, they've selected it, then I put the name. So it's a nice indication of what's going on. All right, so these checkbox, nothing big going on there. We just put the names. Notice I put the text of the values, okay? And then some more checkboxes over here for the different choices. I put a link in. So that one's got a advanced, so that's kind of a little interesting. So we can launch, we say on select. So we can do it here too. We can put this big launch. So how do you get that? Well, you just go, if I go back to Teams, I can go to the channel and get link. So it's just that link there that we put in. So it's a nice little one. They can say, hey, what channel is this going to go to? And click it. So let's go look at the visible of this guy. So I like to have a field like this that tells them what they need to put in. So very similar to our visible on the gallery, we're going to check that is blank, and then we're going to say, okay, at least one of the values has to be checked, and at least one of the transmission methods have to be checked, so that they can't submit it with and it not do anything. So again, if you watch this, I'll select it, one, and then if I check one of those, see how it goes away. If I uncheck it, it comes back. All right, last thing before we get into our submit code is it was a little bit challenging to get the value text over to Power Automate. And so what I did there was an HTML field. So I can go ahead and set its visible to true so you can see it. But that's kind of hidden. It is hidden, so because you don't really want to see it, but we use it programmatically. So if we look at our HTML text, pull this down. If you're into HTML, it's an unordered list. So you put the UL and then the /UL at the back, and then we basically say if the first one's checked, then we add a list item with whatever the text was. If it's the second one, and if it's the third one. So that's pretty straightforward. So let's run that and see. So notice it goes away, but if I check this one, check that one, and they're always in the right order too. And then I just grab the HTML text. We'll see we put that in a variable and send that off to Power Automate. All right, so let's close that. So before we get into our submit code, let's go over, or actually let's do the first part of the submit, and then when we get to the actual sending it to Power Automate, I'll jump out. Let's do that. All right, so first thing we're going to do is just set some variables. So I'm going to do a variable called var body, and I'm just going to say congratulations, and this is all going to be HTML. So I put some breaks in there. You have exemplified the qualities of these values, and then there's that HTML text I just talked to you about. So that's that. Now we're going to keep going. If the details box, and that was HTML as well, we're just going to pin that. If it's empty, we just do nothing. But if it's not, then we're going to pin that on there. So again, if I go back to our email again, you can kind of see. So this is the congratulations. That's the HTML text of the bullets. And then this is the details that I typed in, that if it had been blank, I would just skip it. But if not, I put it in there. And then we say, okay, well, it's going to check that box. Tell recipient who nominated. If that's true, then we say who recognized them. Okay, so that's one thing we do. The other thing we do is we're going to take a variable, a var submitter, and we're going to put the user's full name in there. And we're actually going to use that in our logic inside of Power Automate just to do an if. If that's blank, we're going to try to skip who it is, and if it's not blank, we're going to use it. So, or we're going to tell them who's going on. So that's what's going on there. And then, so we either set it to the user's full name or we set it to blank. All right, next thing we do is we do an if, and then we're going to check that error label. So rather than doing all that logic, is the var recipient blank and one of the values checked and all that, we just say, hey, if the error label is visible, we just return false and don't do anything else. Otherwise, we're going to patch, and I covered all this in another video, so we won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but we patch the name of our list, then we call the defaults, which puts any default values in there, and then we just set up each of our columns. Now the hard part on this is this recipient. So let's go back to SharePoint for just a minute. I kind of glossed right over that. Oh, I guess it's in this. To go back to SharePoint, this recipient, if I come in here and look at the list settings, this recipient is type person or group. Okay, so that's why that's difficult, and that's why also why I can only put in my registered user, because guest users don't really come in as a person there. And so I have to do all this OData type and all that, and I use that var recipient. And if you have the book, you can go right to that. Let me just bring it over, because that's literally what I did. I have this is the book, and I did the same thing in my help ticket example. And scrolls on to the next one. There's that whole thing, OData type, and out of there you put the department. So that's how you read from your PowerApps, that Office 365 users, and throw it in as a person column into SharePoint. That's what's going on, that whole big thing. And then the rest of this is pretty straightforward. These are the names of the columns, and this is like the recipient's department, and then just checking those boxes in the HTML text. So you save all that to SharePoint. So that's what actually adds each to the item. Then we're going to go in and call our Power Automate. So let's leave that open. We'll go into Power Automate. Because what you can do, you can actually do all this with PowerApps, but I like the Power Automate. It gives a little more power, and also had trouble getting the chat part. It's a little more advanced on Power Automate than trying to do it all inside of PowerApps. So here's our flow here, and I'm going to edit it and just kind of show you the things to go through. So what you first do is you say that the trigger, and you can use the template, is from PowerApps. And then we initiate all our variables. Okay, so we literally, and what I like to do is I put the name in, and then I'll rename this and paste the name into the name so that I can see it better, because otherwise it just says initiate variable. And plus it names our variables better that way. Because what you do here is you come over, and then it gives you these names, and see, if you do that first, it puts the name better so that you can tell what's what. So that's, and then when you see it from PowerApps, it's a lot cleaner as well. So definitely recommend that. So literally, we just put the stuff. So I'm going to put the display name, which is the person that we're recognizing, their email, that values HTML. So those are all those bullets. But the whole thing, with the text and everything. The submitter's name, that's going to be blank, by the way, if we're trying to be anonymous. And then, do we post to the channel? Do we send via chat? Do we send via email? So we bring all those through. Notice these are Boolean ones. Now, my original example was on the government cloud. And by the way, if you have trouble doing this, you might have to do an if expression. So if it's quote true, then set it to true. But on the commercial cloud, I didn't have any trouble. I was able to bring it in as Boolean, and it recognized it as Boolean. So that's kind of nice. So what I'm talking about is I use that variable, post to channel, is it equal to true? had some trouble getting that to actually take. So something to keep in mind. So if it's yes, then we do another one. Okay, so this is where it's saying if that var submitter is not equal to blank, so if it has a value, then we're going to just post it slightly different. So I pick my team, pick my channel, and then I just put my value HTML in there. Notice I have a subject too, so I say employee recognition for that person. Okay, and then if it's no, then same kind of thing. I actually tried. It turns out the at symbol only, where you tag them, only works sometimes. That's why I didn't put it over there. So let's go back and look at the HTML. So if I go back to my post. So for whatever reason, so this is the one where I send it as myself. And for some reason right now, it's not putting, the at gives an error. That's why I didn't put it in there. So I put it in, it says who I've been recognized. And then this one comes through and says, okay, I send it as the flow as opposed to the user. So it does now work for me to recognize it or to mention the person. But then I got it, put that in this Power Automate to send notifications. So that's what's going on there. So this one, again, I didn't tell you. This is a post a message, and this is post a message as flowbot. And that's why, because I'm not putting the name of the user. All right, so the rest of these are fairly similar. So I'll do the same for send to chat. Is it true? Do I want to be the flowbot or not? Again, I post this one. I try two different ones. One's is number 2, one's the other one. So again, I come through. I say post as the flowbot and chat with the flowbot, and then this one basically does the same. I was having trouble to get it to work if it says do it as the user, so that's where it's coming through. There's the, by the way, where I tried to change that to, I had that extra HTML, so I'll get rid of that because it didn't work anyway, or I didn't actually need it there. And then now we're going to send an email, and the real only difference here is which control. If I send via Outlook, then it just automatically sends from me. Okay, but if I use this send mail, that's where it becomes anonymous. So it's basically the same. Don't have any of the other choices. So that's pretty much it. Let me save that since I edited the flow a little bit. So let's go back. We're already 23 minutes in. But what happens is, by the way, there's a little trick I'll show you in a minute. So when you're trying to set these up, don't use your button like this. It's already set up because it'll override all your text. So I'll show you that in a minute, but let's go through it. So literally I would come in here. If I just start typing it in, notice that it gives me all those variables in the order. So back when we talked about how to rename each step, that helps because it comes back over here. So we literally are passing in the display name, the email address, that var body, that var submitter, which could be blank, and then the Boolean values. And then we call the notify, that's where we say it's successful, and when we reset our thing. So fairly cool. Oh yeah, that's not what we want. Let's go here. So here's what I was talking about. If you were setting that Power Automate in the first place, what you want to do is just add its own, add your own button, and then come up here and say PowerApps, and then you want to say, oh, I've got some other ones to do. Yeah, and see what it does is it puts the text in there in the button, then you can copy that over. But if you did that on my submit button, it would have just blown away all my codes. Now I can undo and everything, but it's kind of a hassle when you got a bunch of code in there. So instead, now that you know what it looks like, then you can just cut that like that, go into the other button, and then you delete this one. Come on. There we go. All right, so I think that's pretty much it as far as the Power Apps and the Power Automate. You saw those in action. So let's end on the Power BI. So I'm going to go over to Power BI Desktop. And that's the one we saw earlier. Let's refresh, so we should see some additional submissions coming in here. There we go. See, we did a couple there, and it's anywhere from 0 to 8 days on the most recent. So the main challenge here is, let's go over into transform data. I'll just go back here. So there's a couple things going on. First is this details as HTML text in it, so that's kind of hard to work with. This recipient, trying to figure out who it is, it's a record, so we got to mess with that. We basically go in and oh, I also expanded, sorry. First it's a list, then we come in and expand to new rows, which turns it into a record, and then we expand the recipient, and then I'll rename it as recipient. I've got the recipient email, so that's how you get that. Okay, similar when we go over to created by, get the same thing. So we'll expand it and put it, rename it to submitter. The next thing that we want to do is notice our data, as we talked about, it's just true, false, but to get that there, we want to pivot. So what you do, or unpivot. So what you do is you select all the ones like that. Now we don't do these share to teams because we don't really care, but we're trying to get these values. And you come over here and you say unpivot only selected columns. So since I already did that, what that does is give us a bunch of new rows, but it says attribute and value. And since that the value is what I wanted, I actually want it to be like that. So I rename this to the has value, and then this is the value itself. But I don't really care when they're false. I only care when they're true. So that's where I did a custom column. So I'll double click that. Whoops. Oh, actually, I got a couple. I didn't do them in exact order. So let's talk about the days since submitted. I do this in pretty much every Power BI I do. I like to grab and figure out how old the data is. So this whole thing, date time from, date, and then parentheses, date time.local now, that gives you today's date and time, right, when you're running the report. And then we subtract the created in there. So that gives us the number of days, and then I always change that to a whole number. So we don't care about that. Okay, so we got that going. Let's go to the conditional column. There we go. So going back to the value and has value, I'm going to make another column called exemplified value. And I'm basically going to say, okay, if the has value is true, then I'm just going to put this value in there. Else, I'm going to put null in there. So let's go there. Oh, actually I didn't. I went too far. There we go. And so we'll notice when it's false, it's just null. And so we can then filter. So we just come in here and say remove empty. And that gets rid of all those columns. So because, again, we're expanding. If we look, the best way to understand that, because we'll see it later, is if we look for the ID. I've got to actually find the ID here. There we go. So we basically, we only had one row for that ID, but now we have two or three. And like this one, we did all three, so we did four. But we don't need the ones for the falses, so we're just going to count the ones where it's true. All right, and then let's see, what else did we do? We renamed some columns. Oh, and I did one more custom column, which I've forgotten what I needed there. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is pretty cool. I haven't actually done this before. So going back to this HTML, you know, it's fairly ugly in there. If you kind of look at, roll over and see if we can see what, yeah, you can see it. So it's got this div class and this, paragraph tag and all that. So for this purpose, we just want to have the text. And so this is kind of a nice little solution. So you use this html.table function. That's the name of our column. So I renamed it from details to details HTML. I'm going to name the column details, and then I'm going to put a new element of that column. So that's what we just want to name it. And then this print or colon root says do the entire value. I don't start anywhere in particular. So we'll notice what it looks like if I go all the way over. It turns it into a table. And then I can do my same old thing, get the details out and expand it. So that's what that does. And notice I have just the text. Now it's not the most elaborate text in the world, but it's kind of nice. It gets in whatever I typed in there. All right, so I can close all that. So now we're just kind of doing our standard stuff. The main thing to remember here is that since I did that unpivot, I need to always be sure to do count distinct instead of just the count. So if I come in here and select on number of submissions, I just use that exemplified value, and then I have the count distinct of the ID, and then I rename that to say number of submissions. Same thing for the recipient. They're all me, but in a real one that would be different people. I always like these cards, so that's again distinct count of the ID. It's going to be nice to have a slicer for our exemplified value. We're going to have a slicer for our days since submitted. And then I can't use a table because it won't look very good. Let's click on that. But instead I can use a matrix. So that's this guy here. And then you put the items in. So recipient, and you want to, the things that caused it to differ, which caused the multiple rows are the exemplified value. So we want that to be last. So I put recipient created details, which will be blank in some cases, and then the exemplified value. And then you just keep hitting this expand button until it goes all the way down. So that's why it's always me, but it's got the date, and then that's the details, and then those are the value or values that the person did. And the reason is because I selected that over there. So there you go. Now I can see all of them. And then the whole reason we did that unpivot is so we could build this bar chart here. So we put the exemplified value along the axis, and then the count is that, again, distinct count, the number of submissions. And so we can see which relative values. So both of these are showing similar things, but it's kind of nice to be able to do it that way. So both of this and this kind of require that unpivot. And then the only thing we duplicate that, the only thing we do on the 7 days is we put a filter so that days since submitted is less than or equal to 7. So that's why we knocked one. We had one that was 8 days old when I first built this. So, all right, well, lots of stuff there, but hopefully there's some value for you guys, and I'll look forward to talking to you on the next video.